Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak on Bill 7, the Alberta Human Rights Amendment Act 2015. This bill, which will add gender expression and gender identity to the Alberta Human Rights Act, is something the transgender and the gender variant community have asked for decades. This bill would allow transgender and gender variant Albertans to confront discrimination we know still exists in our society. Some of our members may not be familiar with what being transgender means. As a gay man and an ally to the transgender and gender variant community, I make my fair share of mistakes too, but I do my best to get it right. That means listening to transgender and gender variant individuals when they tell us about their lived experiences. So what does transgender mean? Transgender is an umbrella term for people whose gender identity differs from the sex assigned to them at birth. The key to understanding what transgender means is understanding the difference between sex and gender. Sex refers to the physical characteristics that are associated with being male or female, including primary sex characteristics such as genitals and secondary sex characteristics such as breasts. Gender refers to the social presentation of masculinity and femininity. Many cultures have strict rules about how to perform masculinity and femininity. Rigid masculine and feminine gender roles are referred to as the gender binary. However, ideas about gender are not static. They change across time and place, within one society and between different cultures. Transgender individuals do not identify with the sex that they were assigned at birth and present their gender in a way that reflects their true selves. Some transgender persons choose to have gender-affirming surgery so that their physical characteristics reflect their gender identity, and some do not. Gender identity does not relate to sexual orientation. Transgender and gender variant people may identify as straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, or any other sexual orientation. You may not know the difference between gender identity and gender expression. Gender identity is one's innermost concept of self as male, female, a blend of both, or neither. How individuals perceive themselves and what they call themselves. One's gender identity can be the same or different from their sex assigned at birth. Gender expression is the external appearance of one's gender identity, usually expressed through behavior, clothing, or haircut, and which may or may not conform to socially defined behaviors and characteristics typically associated with being either masculine or feminine. Trans and gender variant Albertans face problems none of us could even imagine. When the Minister of Justice and Solicitor General and Minister of Aboriginal Relations, the member for Strathcona-Sherwood Park, the member for Calgary Cross and I held consultations, we heard of the incredible struggles that these individuals face on a daily basis. Not only is it difficult to find a proper psychologist as a trans individual, it can be near impossible to find the particular psychologist that can offer the services required to start hormones or apply for gender-affirming surgery. There are also only 2 doctors in Alberta that have the authority and the knowledge necessary to connect these Albertans with the one clinic in Canada that can perform gender-affirming surgery, if the individual wished to have the gender-affirming surgery. Many transgender individuals choose not to have the gender-affirming surgery and are therefore ineligible to receive various forms of government identification with their correct gender on it. While this legislation will not deal with this specific issue, it is an important first step to show the transgender and gender variant communities that we are on their side when it comes to these issues. Trans and gender variant individuals are less likely to have access to health care in our province and are often turned away by physicians and mental health practitioners because of prejudice or perceived lack of skills to treat transgender and gender variant Albertans. This happens even if the individual is seeking care for issues not related to their gender, which has led to transgender and gender variant people to have higher risk of heart disease, mental health concerns such as anxiety, depression and suicide, substance abuse, eating disorders, interpersonal violence, certain cancers, and are less likely to participate in preventative health. Follow-up care is also a big issue, as few doctors will assist post-surgical patients directly, requiring trips back to the original surgeon for any corrective work. For trans women, finding a gynecologist willing to give examinations can be a problem. One trans woman had her gynecologist refuse to refer to her parts as a vagina, and instead would only call it her hole. Offensive and hardly the attitude of a caring physician, but this was the only gynecologist who would agree to see her, so she stayed. Another trans woman in Calgary was given an M wristband despite presenting both her forms of ID with the F marker. When asked to change it, the clerk refused. Alberta Health Services policy already states that a client's preferred gender should be respected on wristbands and in an address regardless of ID presented. So this action was against policy and significantly added to her stress right before undergoing a fairly major procedure. The concerns of trans and gender variant individuals is only increased by the fact that approximately 50% of transgender and gender variant people have been raped or assaulted by a romantic partner, and that transgender and gender variant people of all ages frequently face rejection by their families. Youth who experience family rejection are more likely to attempt suicide, experience high levels of depression, use illegal drugs, and become homeless. This helps to explain why the LGBTQ community make up the highest segment of homeless youth, with the majority of that youth being transgender and gender variant. People loving and accepting transgender and gender variant family members is the cornerstone for transgender and gender variant Albertans to have happy, healthy, and longer lives. Without the support of family, it can be hard to build strength and to fight against the inequality and discrimination transgender and gender variant people face in their day-to-day lives. Employment can be an incredibly tenuous situation for many transgender and gender variant Canadians, particularly once they begin to transition. Once a transgender person loses their job, it can be very difficult to get rehired, especially in our current economic climate. Chronic unemployment is a significant factor in the community and drives the disproportionate level of homelessness, depression, and may result in trans individuals taking higher risks to make ends meet. As an example of how little understanding there is among employers, I was told by one transgender woman that when coming out to her supervisor at work, he expressed concern she would show up to work looking like a drag queen. So it's clear there's still a long way to go in explaining the difference. While she can't conclusively say it affected her career arc, the supervisor stopped taking her along for lunch with consultants and bringing her to trade shows. Another woman just starting her transition at work was told by her boss, if it affects our customers and they stop coming in, our employees have an issue, then we will have to have a difficult discussion. This was from someone whom she thought would be supportive. The concept of the toxic work environment figures heavily into what trans people face in the workplace. Rarely is someone told that they are being terminated because they are trans. Instead, they are made to use different facilities, asked to work from home, or simply made to feel unwelcome until they leave. Bill 7 will help to show transgender and gender variant people that we stand with them in solidarity. We are here to show this community that we cannot and will not sit idly by while our friends, family, and colleagues are struggling to survive and receive the care that they are supposed to be guaranteed by our Constitution. 40 to 50% of transgender and gender variant individuals have attempted suicide, and 90% have seriously considered it. This is absolutely unacceptable. We are here to show Albertans that we will not stand for discrimination of any kind. Albertans are diverse and welcoming, and understand that our communities thrive when they are supportive. We must ensure that our legislation holds true to these values. Simply voting for this bill does not mean that we as MLAs have vanquished transphobia. It does not mean that we can no longer be called transphobic ourselves. It only means that at this point in time, we were able to do the right thing. Legislation is only ink on paper unless it can somehow be moved from paper into the lives of Albertans. Therefore, legislation cannot be the government's only role. Basic human rights for trans and gender diverse people must be embedded into the culture of all that comes forward. Each and every member of this legislature, every staff person, every department, every communique, every policy and future piece of legislation must ultimately change with this bill. We must remember to think of how everything we do in this chamber will affect the LGBTQ+ community, especially the transgender and gender variant community, so that we can stop the institutionalized discrimination minority groups face across the province. Only when people are provided with knowledge will we see real change in the lived experiences of transgender and gender diverse people. Albertans recognize the importance of freedom. With Bill 7, we can provide protection for transgender and gender variant people to live freely as their authentic selves. That is why I'm supporting this bill, and I hope all my colleagues in this House will as well. Thank you.